Between the years of 1914 and 1918, over 21 million people were injured. 20 million more were killed. That's a combined casualty amount of over 41 million between civilians and military personnel. If you haven't already guessed why, well, it's because of World War I, also known as the Great War for its revolutionary ideas, but massive groundbreaking battlefields and conflicts. Hello class, my name is Roberto Navarrete, and today I'm going to be talking about how World War I first began with research that I've gathered through MSJC library databases, scholarly articles, and government databases. Secondly, I like to examine the advancements made in military technology and industrialism. And then lastly, I'd like to follow up with the end of the war and the consequences that had came with it. As I begin, the event that started the war happened on June 28, 1914, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, Austria, by a Serbian nationalist terrorist group known as the Black Hand. In the article World War I Resources published by the Department of Education in Indiana, Serbia wanted to take over Bosnia and Herzegovina, which were both territories owned by Serbia. This conflict piled up with previous conflicts of militarism and nationalism, which made Europe a powder keg just ready to blow. With the assassination of the Archduke, that was the conflict that was the spark to light the flame. As Russia prepared to mobilize due to its alliance with Serbia, Germany then proceeded to declare war. Now, the war was only meant to be between Austria and Serbia. However, the neutral declared state, Belgium, was then attacked by German forces. Soon after, the US intercepted the Zimmermann telegram from Germany to Mexico. For those of you who do not know what the Zimmermann telegram is, it's a telegram entailing an alliance between Germany and Mexico to help overthrow the US. If Mexico were to comply and aid in doing so, they would receive all the territory that they had lost between the war in Mexico and the US. The territory that Mexico would then receive is Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. After the interception of the telegram, the US answered the call to arms and decided to join the Allies with Austria, Great Britain, Italy, and the Russian Empire. Now, as I move forward, I'd like to secondly talk about the advancements made within the war, along with industrialism. The war began to break old limits and reach new levels of mass destruction as capitals and entire cities became the battlegrounds for many people in which where they lost their lives. Assembly lines that were once used for building cars were now massive producing factories of rifles, ammunitions, explosives, anything that the Allies need, those factories began producing, and at a very fast rate in which it turned the favor of the tide of war in our favor. One of the biggest weapon advancements made on the battlefield was the advancement of the air-cooled machine gun. Historian Tory McLean published the article World War I Technology and Weapons of War, where he detailed that the full potential of the air-cooled machine gun was demonstrated on the Battle of Somme in July of 1916, where German forces killed almost 60,000 British troops with the air-cooled machine guns in a single day. Unfortunately, one of the saddest factors of war was the millions that died needlessly because of the military and civilian leaders who were too slow to adapt their old-fashioned ways and strategies to the new weapons of war in 1914. Automatic weapons, artillery, and new chemical warfare created a nightmare for all who decided to enter no man's land. Trench warfare became a common way to avoid incoming fire above ground, so they decided to dig into the ground and bring the fight there. But as you may have thought as well, it presented its own problems down there as well. Disease, rats, harsh weather condition, and mustard gas were all factors that contributed to death throughout the war. Many would come back traumatized, shell-shocked, or even insane, but most of them never came back at all. As the gears of war decided to turn, full mobilization was implemented as tanks, planes, submarines, warships, and trains were all made. They all became mobile vehicles of mass destruction. The troops needed barriers broken and a vehicle that could cause destruction, something that could also provide a lot of cover. The factories began to produce mass amounts of tanks, such fast rates that Germany began to not be able to keep up. Planes were implemented into aerial combat, and bombers were first made within this war. But as you may think, dogfighting was not the first stage. In fact, it was operations and recons with crop dusters in which aerial combat advanced. The way it advanced was pilots would go underdo operations and recon. They would then take pictures of the terrain and bring it back as intel. However, the enemy caught on and started to do the same as well. Then what became as two pilots flying by doing recon became two pilots flying by with M1911s firing at each other. Well, as you may know, a 1911 is not going to blow up a plane miles high up in the air going at very fast speeds. So what they decided to do when they got back to base was that they decided to mount two air-cooled machine guns on the front of the plane. Therefore, whenever an opposing pilot saw the other, they began to dogfight. And that's where the true aerial combat began, where even more advancements were made, or when larger aircrafts were being made with a bigger payload to bring explosives and drop them on the battlegrounds. Those were the first bombers implemented into the war. These smaller planes were more fast and agile and acted as squadrons or protection for the bombers to help them reach their destination. The amount of firepower and willpower that the Allies and the US gave throughout the war was immensely groundbreaking. Warfare reached new levels and limits, and many advancements were discovered by the end of the war. And fortunately, the end of the war was soon coming. On November 10th, 1918, the war finally came to an end. Germany experienced months of decline within their resources, and military caused them to officially and formally surrender. On November 11th, 1911, Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty entailed, in which they agreed to surrender their arms, the majority of their navy, evacuate any occupied territory that they held throughout the war. On top of that, they also had to demilitarize the entire Rhineland, which is the area that they are in, and release 13% more territory that they held before the war, and pay the extensive payments of destruction that they had caused. Germany was being held completely responsible for this. And in fact, in an article on the Treaty of Versailles published by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, it detailed that the treaty contained a war guilt clause that held Germany completely responsible, in which they were left immensely vulnerable. Germany suffered greatly, immensely after the war, in which they were left weak, vulnerable, and in massive debt. The Great War serves as one of the biggest historic phenomena the globe has ever seen. It changed the embodiment of warfare forever. For a short period, there was peace. The beginning of reparations began to be made, and the whole world thought that the worst had passed, or so they thought. Little did they know that within the next 10 years, the face of the world was bound to change again, and the gears of war were going to continue to crank. Thank you.